Hello.
Yes, yes, we can.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon and mabuhay. I'm Daniel Jonborgh Diaz from the College of Computer and Information Science at Malayang Colleges, Laguna, Philippines. So mabuhay to my fellow presenters from the Philippines as well. Today I'm going to discuss with you all my case study and my presentation, the resiliency to financial management information innovations in the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So first, let me start with the introduction. FX editorial board described this event as a domino effect for economies. From a global scale where globalization was rather disrupted, with the global trade from nations being disrupted as well, it has entitled us to embrace a common term nowadays as the new normal. It is also relevant in what we do right now, like this online conference. Um, with that said, a part of globalization that ratherly affects uh, this outcome is SCM or supply chain management, which many from the manufacturing industry, many economies rely upon because not all parts to produce a product or a service came only from one place. It came from many different places, and the disruption in that chain have a huge effect in the economy. Now, from supply chain management to socioeconomics, this has rather a big effect from how we do things in the new normal. From conducting face-to-face meetings, we are now doing digital like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and many more. Um, from physically buying products, we now embrace on digitally buying it through digital markets, and of course conferences like this in RSU. Now, what does this mean for governments, organizations, and businesses alike? Um, this has a rather big effect, more on governments, because it has the tendency for these organizations, especially governments, to ask and find solutions, especially financial management information system solutions, that would rather be appropriate and can adapt to this rather very changing environments such as the current health pandemic. With that said, the objectives of the study was first to have an insight on what effective criteria and factors should we have in order to determine how these systems could be effective and efficient in their own ways. And in this case, I've reviewed two countries, the case of PhilPass in the Philippines and d-Bas in South Korea. Combining what we learned from effective criteria and factors with the case studies that is highlighted in my study, we would derive knowledge on what pertains an effective and an efficient financial management information solution to build resiliency based on those criteria. Now, the methodology that I will be using is called a narrative literature review, which means that I'll be focusing on identifying scenarios, identifying gaps, identifying inconsistencies with the case studies and how they reacted to some scenarios, which would lead to the establishment of what we call a comprehensive, critical, and objective analysis of not only how the system reacted based on a certain environment, but also to the research objectives at hand. Moving on to the results and discussion, I'll start first with a citation from a book from Leveson 2006, which describes effective resiliency to have these kinds of factors. First is implementation, second is innovation, and third is application of practical technologies. What does I squared A would have a mean for resiliency? It would have a big impact on the way how from implementation of the solution to the final product of the solution in terms of their production use in a government standpoint or an organizational standpoint, from the implementation plan to the innovation and its integration, as I'll describe later, and its application to the final product of the service would allow us to identify and describe how the systems was built and how the systems was integrated to provide resiliency and allow them to have effective and efficient processes in other ends. Now, for the criteria and factors from these first factors that Leveson stated, concluding on that study, he defined it as the ability of that certain solution to adapt to a wide range of operational conditions and the ability of that system to adapt to an ever-growing changing environment, which in this case is the COVID-19 pandemic. Understanding how those systems react, how those systems were used, how those systems were um, effectively used in a certain case would allow us to create a certain knowledge, an idea, and a growing sense of how these systems would be able to be utilized further, not only in further researches, but also in further studies and further implementations of the solutions. Moving on um, to the citation on the Journal of Song, um, the missing part in Leveson's study is that they did not suggest how we could measure or how we could say that it is a successful financial management system. So on a Journal of Thong Yap and Raman in 1994, they provided the means to measure this by comparing whether the initial plan to the production goal or or has it met the organizational goals that the system was intended to do in the first place. Knowing that, we could knowing that factors, we could be able to persist whether these systems could be applicable as successful in doing what they are intended to be doing. Now, one part of the factors being said on Leveson's study was innovation. Now, innovation in a broad term means thinking out of the box, thinking new things. But in the term of information systems, innovation more likely is the tightness of the integration of one solution to the certain business process. So in Swanson's study in 1994 as well, he depicted that there are three types of innovations. Type 1 innovation has the addition of these information systems in a specific part of an organizational process, while type 2 innovations have the focus on being a decision support system, while type 3 innovations have the focus on being a core system, meaning that it is tightly integrated in the bits and crannies of the organization. Now, knowing that, I'll start with what the study had learned with South Korea and d-Bas and d-Brain. Now, to give you a background, d-Bas, which stands for the Digital Budget and Accounting System, is part of the Korean Public Financial Information System that manages the funds and asset allocation within the entire Korean government. Here's the sample of that framework. From the business support system, this is the front end, which is based on a web-based technology, while the central financial information system, the main system, is what's more likely the d-Bas itself. In a financial management information system, it's more likely composed of a lot of subsystems. In this case, from budget management to accounting management, and the statistical analysis system, which also stands as a decision support system, is actually the brain or the digital brain. External links allow them to have more data points for their effective statistical analysis. In this case, how the South Koreans d-Bas works is that it allows effective and efficient fund management in their end. Two examples actually that we could cite with this on how South Korean government has used this solution is that they were able to have an effective pandemic response in reallocating budget and assets on their end to fight with the pandemic response. The second is that I've also cited this in the paper, the use of d-Bas and d-Brain for the implementation of what's called a basic income, rather unique solution in order to have a to energize the economy that even in South Korea, a wealthy nation, do have problems and how was hit by the rather globalization issue caused by COVID-19. Now, moving on with the case from the Philippines, my country, PhilPass, which is part of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas system. PhilPass, which in the Philippines, my fellow Filipino presenters would know this rather well. It's called InstaPay and PesoNet. It's a common term in the banking industry. PhilPass is both part of the national payment and retail system and the Philippines RTGS, which is the real-time gross settlement system. A rather unique position in PhilPass is that it is used as a means to um, entice Filipino consumers to better use digital financial transactions like bank transfers using their phones. It also have a rather big effect on how consumer spending has changed in the Philippines. Like, for example, from the previous presenters, the Food Panda or the delivery, most of them rely on the PhilPass framework in order for them to have a function on buying food online using either their bank accounts, GCash, or Paymaya, which is common in the Philippines. PhilPass actually was depicted by Jokno in 2020 that it was a key component in the Philippines' resiliency on the economic front end in COVID-19 because it is tightly integrated with the Philippine financial system, from third-party systems to BSP systems to direct participants. PhilPass is a multi-functional use of a financial management system, not only to monitor settlements of financial fees from BSP, but it also serves a key financial economic data point for the Philippine government. One fact that actually is beneficial from PhilPass is that it is a great measure of the health of the Philippine consumer market or the Philippine consumer economy. And utilizing the PhilPass system and its subnetworks InstaPay and PesoNet would have a great data point on the government's action on the pandemic response, which is actually one of the key aspects that the Philippine government uses in identifying, well, the lockdown scenarios that is currently happening in our country. Now, here's the Venn diagram of what I've just said. This is just a representation of the difference and the similarities between the two systems. While both of them are considered to be called as a financial management information systems, they do both serve two different markets, two different types of scenarios, and two different types of things. However, similarly is that they do both have great integration from their consumer front end, and they do both provide effective economic decision support. And d-Brain from the d-Bas system has statistical reporting, and in the Philippine payment and settlement system, or PhilPass, it is more likely functional as an economic metric and an FPM, or financial performance management. Knowing that, concluding my study in the 4Cs, the study was able to find out that financial management information systems do provide critical insights, essential decision support, and of course, essential financial management with the case of South Korea, and essential decision support in the case of the Philippines. With that said, the d-Bas and d-Brain was able to allow for effective fund reallocation in terms of how they were able to reallocate funds to fight in their pandemic response. For PhilPass, it serves as an economic stimulus, and it serves as a way for the Philippine government to have a more rich data set on what to do based on the strength of their Philippine consumer market, which in turn is actually an effective strategic decision support. Now, my study was only able to cover two relative systems of FMIS, but further studies would be able to include more applicable systems and instances of this kind that would allow us to create a wider and more effective view of how the systems will be able to further enhance our knowledge, not only for future researchers itself, but also to may this research be a guide for them for people that are planning to introduce systems that would be enabling them to be more resilient in these kinds of changes, moreover in an economic standpoint. Now that concludes my study for the presentation. I would like to have a special thanks to Dr. Elenita Red, which actually invited me to present in this conference, and of course to RSU for this opportunity to share my study. I would like to open the floor now for any questions regarding the study.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. May I ask any questions from other participants? Okay, if no other, okay, can let me ask question because I personally interested in this topic. Why you select the South Korea as a comparison to your own country, Philippines? Why it should be South Korea?
Well, in the case of South Korea, what the great thing that you could see with South Korea's case is it's tightly integrated into almost every agency in the South Korean government, unlike the Philippines case where that it's only integrated within one financial sector. The integration of it, which is part of innovation itself, if it's not tightly integrated as a means to effectively manage it, the lesser and less effective it is for a organization like a government in this regard.
Okay, yeah, okay, thank you for the answer. Okay, so I think this topic is quite interesting. Like I mean, during the period of we have some unexpected thing happen, right? COVID-19 or something like that. So the thing that helps us a lot will be should be like if you have a good innovation in terms of information system, it can help us keep running our operation. Yeah, so to understand this will be quite useful. Okay.
Uh,
So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.